In 2009, a 24-year-old woman named Rachel Monroe set out to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest peak and one of the most iconic treks in the world. She was young, full of life, and chasing a dream she'd talked about since she was a teenager. Friends described her as fearless but careful, a woman who loved the outdoors yet always prepared meticulously for her trips. But somewhere on that mountain, Rachel disappeared. No trace, no signal, no answers. For 7 agonizing years, her family begged for closure while authorities searched and came up empty. And then, in 2016, 2 hikers on a little-used trail stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. Rachel's hiking bag, still intact, lying where no one had ever thought to look. What they found inside it would unravel one of the most haunting mysteries in Kilimanjaro's history. Rachel wasn't reckless. She had trained for months before her climb, hitting the trails near her Colorado hometown and pushing herself to handle both altitude and endurance. She wasn't a tourist who had decided to climb Kilimanjaro on a whim. She was ready. Her plan was to summit via the Machame Road, one of the most scenic yet challenging paths up the mountain, known for its steep ascents and breathtaking views. She kept in touch with her parents by email before the trip, promising them daily updates through her guide service. Her last message, sent from Moshi, Tanzania, read, "Tomorrow it begins. Don't worry. I'll be careful." That was the last anyone heard from her. On the morning of August 12, 2009, Rachel set out with a small group of trekkers and local guides. Witnesses said she was cheerful, snapping photos at the park gate, and full of energy. For the first day, everything went according to plan. But by day 2, when the group reached Shira Camp at over 11,000 feet, Rachel was gone. The guides claimed she left her tent early in the morning, saying she wanted to get a head start on the day's trek. They never saw her again. Panic spread quickly. Search parties combed the trail, helicopters were dispatched, and local rescue teams scoured the dense forests and barren slopes. Yet not a single piece of Rachel's gear was found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her parents flew to Tanzania, pleading with officials for answers. They waited at the base of the mountain for weeks, clinging to hope each time rescuers returned, only to face crushing disappointment. The official search was eventually called off after 12 days, leaving the family to return home without their daughter. Years passed. Rachel's disappearance faded from the headlines, but her family never stopped searching. They raised money to fund private expeditions, begged for satellite reviews of the region, and even hired local trackers. Every effort ended in failure. To her parents, the silence was unbearable. To her friends, the mystery was unthinkable. To climbers and hikers, it was a chilling reminder that even on a mountain climbed by thousands every year, a single wrong turn could mean disappearing forever. 7 years later, in September 2016, 2 experienced hikers from Germany, Lukas Weber and Henrik Bauer, were descending a less-traveled section of the northern slopes when Lukas spotted something unusual near a cluster of volcanic rocks. At first, he thought it was trash left behind by careless climbers. But as he approached, he realized it was a backpack. It was weathered, covered in dust, but surprisingly intact. When he brushed it off and unzipped the main pocket, he froze. Inside were items no ordinary climber would leave behind: a passport, a journal, and a water bottle labeled with the name Rachel Monroe. The men looked at each other, stunned. They had both heard the story years earlier, the American girl who had vanished without a trace. Now, in their hands, was proof she had been here. Shaking, Henrik opened the journal. The last entry was dated August 13, 2009, the day after she was last seen. It read simply, "Feeling dizzy, trying to find another path. If I don't make it, tell my family I love them." The hikers immediately alerted park rangers, who secured the site and began a new search in the surrounding area. For Rachel's parents, the phone call they had dreaded and prayed for in equal measure finally came. Their daughter's belongings had been found. But what did it mean? Had she fallen? Had she been injured and unable to return? Or was there something more sinister hidden in Kilimanjaro's slopes? Before we continue, I need to say something directly to you. Stories like Rachel's don't just vanish, they can only stay alive if people like you care enough to keep listening. Too many families are left waiting for answers that never come, their loved ones' names slowly fading from memory. Don't let Rachel's story fade too. Subscribe now, because if you don't, stories like hers are swallowed by silence, and the people who need closure most are left forgotten. Investigators quickly confirmed the bag and its contents belonged to Rachel. Her passport was sealed in a waterproof pouch. Her journal contained 6 short entries, the last one barely legible, her handwriting shaky. There were also photographs, grainy images of mist-covered trails, smiling selfies, and a final shot of a jagged ridge disappearing into fog. But what struck investigators most was the location of the discovery. The northern slopes of Kilimanjaro were nowhere near the Machame route Rachel had started on. How had she ended up there? And why had no one searched this section back in 2009? As forensic teams scoured the area, more questions than answers emerged. There were no human remains near the bag, no clear signs of a fall or struggle. But the placement of the pack suggested it had been set down deliberately, not dropped. Had Rachel been trying to lighten her load? Was she too weak to carry on? Or had someone else placed it there? For Rachel's family, the discovery reignited hope and fear. Hope that her final days were not as lonely as they had imagined, that perhaps she had left clues still waiting to be found. Fear that they might never truly know what happened, even after 7 long years. And as news spread across the world, hikers everywhere began to ask the same chilling question. If someone like Rachel, prepared, careful, experienced, could vanish so completely, what chance did anyone have? The recovery of Rachel Monroe's hiking bag sent shockwaves through both the international climbing community and her grieving family back in Colorado. News outlets across the globe picked up the story, calling it the most haunting clue ever found on Kilimanjaro. For years, the Monroe family had been told that Rachel likely perished quickly and that nothing more would ever surface. Yet now, they had tangible proof that she had made it at least a day beyond when her group last saw her. This single discovery changed everything. Within 48 hours of Lucas Weber and Henrik Bauer turning over the backpack, a team of Tanzanian rangers and international search specialists returned to the site. The conditions were harsh. The northern slopes were steep, rocky, and veiled in mist. Unlike the more popular trails, this area was rarely traveled with little infrastructure to aid search teams. But the urgency was palpable. If Rachel had left her pack there, she must have continued on foot, possibly weakened and disoriented, leaving behind the very supplies she needed to survive. The journal entries inside the pack became a roadmap for investigators. The final lines, shaky and desperate, suggested Rachel had been suffering from altitude sickness, headaches, dizziness, and confusion that plagued climbers above 12,000 feet. Yet something didn't add up. Climbers suffering severe altitude sickness usually descend, seeking lower elevation for relief. Rachel's bag was found further up a steep northern slope, far from her intended route. Had she been so disoriented she'd wandered in the wrong direction? Or had someone led her there? Forensic analysts pored over the items in her bag. Soil samples clung to the seams, and water stains suggested it had endured years of seasonal rains. Yet much of the interior was remarkably preserved, shielded by the waterproofing Rachel had carefully packed. The photographs on her camera chip provided even more unsettling clues. The last known picture, timestamped just hours before her disappearance, showed a faint outline of a man in the background, a man not listed among the trekkers or guides on her expedition. Authorities couldn't identify him. Was he another hiker who had crossed paths with Rachel, or had he been following her? Meanwhile, Lucas and Henrik struggled to process what they had stumbled upon. They were seasoned hikers, men who had seen injuries and rescues before, but never something like this. Henrik later admitted he didn't sleep for days afterward. He kept hearing Rachel's words from the journal. "If I don't make it, tell my family I love them." He couldn't shake the feeling that fate had chosen him and Lucas to uncover the truth. As the renewed search pressed on, teams expanded their radius from the bag's location, scouring crevices, caves, and gullies where a weakened climber might have taken shelter. On the third day, a small group of rangers discovered fragments of clothing about a half-mile downhill from the bag. The material matched what Rachel had been photographed wearing at the trailhead in 2009. Near the fabric were remnants of a small campfire, charred stones arranged in a circle, long cooled but unmistakable. Rachel had tried to survive. She had stayed alive long enough to attempt warmth, to cling to hope. For her parents, hearing this was devastating yet strangely comforting. She hadn't simply vanished. She had fought, she had tried, and yet no remains were found. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed her whole. Before I go further, I want to pause here and speak directly to you again. Stories like Rachel's are terrifying, not because they happened on the other side of the world, but because they could happen to anyone who dares to chase a dream. And the most frightening part? Most of these stories are forgotten, erased by time. If you don't hit subscribe right now, you may never hear the truths that matter most, and families like Rachel's risk being silenced forever. Don't scroll past. Do it now. Because if you were the one waiting for answers, you'd want the world to keep listening. Back on Kilimanjaro, investigators grew convinced that Rachel had become separated from her group much earlier than previously thought. Witness statements from 2009 were re-examined, and inconsistencies began to surface. Some guides insisted she left early that morning. Others claimed they saw her struggling to keep pace the evening before. There were whispers among porters that she had argued with one of the guides about pacing and safety. Could there have been tension in the group that pushed her to set off alone? Another unsettling detail emerged when reviewing ranger logs from 2009. A solo climber from another group had signed in at Shira Camp around the same time Rachel was last seen. His nationality was listed as unknown, his handwriting hurried and nearly illegible. The logbook listed no exit record for him. Investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that Rachel had encountered this mysterious figure on the trail. Weeks turned into months and the new search effort slowly wound down. Though fragments of her clothing and signs of her survival attempts were recovered, Rachel herself remained missing. The bag and the journal became the only tangible connection to her final days. The Tanzanian authorities eventually declared the renewed search closed, citing the impossibility of combing every inch of the mountain. But Rachel's family refused to accept silence again. They organized a private expedition with independent trackers, determined to follow every lead no matter how small. Among the team was Henrik Bauer, the man who had first found her bag. He said he couldn't leave the mountain knowing Rachel was still out there somewhere. They began by retracing the path from the backpack to the fragments of clothing and the site of the campfire. And that's when they made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden beneath a rocky overhang, shielded from casual view, they found a carefully stacked arrangement of stones. Beneath the pile was a silver locket, tarnished but intact. Inside was a photograph, Rachel with her younger brother, taken months before her climb. The message was clear. Rachel had been here. She had left behind pieces of herself, hoping someone would eventually find them. The discovery reignited global interest in the case. Experts speculated endlessly. Had she succumbed to exposure? Had she tried to descend but been caught in a sudden storm? Or was there a darker truth? That someone had been with her in those final hours? And as questions mounted, so too did the pressure on those listening to her story. Because every time a mystery like this is left unsolved, another family somewhere begins to believe their loved one may never be found. The silver locket changed everything. It wasn't just another fragment scattered by weather or wildlife. This was deliberate. Rachel had placed it there, perhaps as a final act of hope, a marker that someone would one day know she had been alive at that spot. For her parents, the locket was both a treasure and a torment. It proved their daughter had survived longer than anyone had imagined, yet it also underscored the horrifying reality. If she had been alive long enough to carefully hide such a personal item, why had she never been found until now? Forensic analysis of the locket showed no signs of tampering. The photograph inside was faded but intact, preserved by the tight clasp of the silver case. Investigators theorized Rachel had carried it close to her heart, and leaving it behind might have been her way of leaving a message, a trace of herself when she realized her strength was running out. But alongside this heartbreaking symbol, troubling evidence also surfaced. Near the stone pile, trackers found a set of boot prints preserved in hardened soil. They were larger than Rachel's hiking boots, and the stride length indicated a man, taller and heavier than her. The prints were old, likely dating back years, but their direction suggested they had come from the same path Rachel had taken. Who was this person? Was it the unknown climber from the Shira Camp logbook, or one of the guides who had gone unaccounted for during the original search? The private expedition pressed on, scouring the jagged gullies and shadowed ravines that crisscrossed the northern slope. At night, they gathered by their campfires, trading theories and fears. Henrik admitted he sometimes thought he could hear her voice on the wind, a trick of the mountain's cruel silence. But what none of them would say aloud was the thought that haunted them all. Rachel hadn't just been lost. Something, or someone, had kept her from ever making it back. The Monroe family made a decision then. They would not let their daughter's memory be buried under theories and rumors. They hired journalists to document the search, spreading Rachel's story once more to an international audience. And with that renewed spotlight came more accounts: hikers who remembered seeing a lone woman near a ridge, porters who had heard rumors of a foreigner spotted on trails no official group ever used. Each account added to the growing puzzle, yet the final picture remained out of reach. On the 7th day of the renewed expedition, the team discovered something chilling just beyond a narrow ravine. Wedged between two rocks, half buried in soil, was Rachel's hiking boot. Inside were remnants of cloth, shredded and weathered. The placement suggested it had not simply fallen off. It looked as if it had been removed, left behind intentionally, or during a desperate struggle. The discovery sent shockwaves through the team. For Rachel's parents, the sight of her boot was unbearable. They had hoped for answers, but each clue only deepened the nightmare. And here's where I need to pause and speak directly to you again. If you're listening to this, you need to understand how fragile hope really is. Rachel's family spent years begging for any sign, and still, the truth remained hidden in the shadows of that mountain. Don't let stories like hers vanish. Don't let the silence win. Hit subscribe right now, because when you don't, families like the Monroes lose their voice, and the people they loved are forgotten. And one day, it could be your story that needs to be told. The boot was carefully collected, photographed, and preserved, while the team fanned out to search the ravine. It was dangerous terrain, a maze of loose rocks and sudden drops, but they pressed on. Hours later, Henrik stumbled upon another chilling find. A faded piece of notebook paper wedged into a crevice, shielded from the rain. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Rachel's. The note was brief, almost frantic, the ink smudged but legible. Cold. So tired. Not sure how much longer. Please, don't forget me. The words cut deep into everyone who read them. Rachel had been alive long enough to know her chances were slipping away. She had begged for the one thing no search team could guarantee, that she wouldn't be forgotten. Armed with this heartbreaking evidence, the private expedition expanded their search yet again. They followed the ravine downward, hoping it might lead to shelter Rachel had sought. But after days of grueling effort, they found nothing more. No remains, no further possessions. Just silence. For her parents, each new clue was both a gift and a curse. They finally knew Rachel hadn't simply vanished without a trace, that she had left behind signs of her fight to survive. But knowing she had been so close to leaving a trail home, yet still lost forever, was almost too much to bear. Meanwhile, theories flourished. Some believed Rachel had been the victim of a tragic accident, weakened by altitude sickness and unable to continue. Others whispered darker suspicions, that the mysterious boot prints meant she hadn't been alone in those final hours, that perhaps her disappearance wasn't just a story of misfortune, but of something much more sinister. The Tanzanian authorities maintained their stance. Without remains, there could be no definitive conclusion. But Rachel's story had already become larger than an official case file. It was a haunting reminder that even on one of the world's most famous mountains, a single misstep, a single wrong decision, could erase a life. And the worst part? The answers might still be there, hidden beneath the rocks and mist of Kilimanjaro, waiting for someone brave enough, or desperate enough, to uncover them. The discovery of Rachel's note was the breaking point for many on the expedition. Some argued they had gone as far as they could, that chasing the truth any deeper into Kilimanjaro's unforgiving terrain would risk more lives. But Henrik Bauer refused to stop. He felt tied to Rachel now, haunted by her words, by the fact that she had begged not to be forgotten. He told the Monroe family that leaving without knowing more would be the same as abandoning her all over again. They pressed onward, pushing further into the ravine system where the note had been found. The terrain grew more dangerous, slopes of loose scree, sudden cliffs hidden in mist, and thin air that clawed at their lungs. Yet hope propelled them forward. If Rachel had left that message, then surely she had tried to leave more. On the 9th day, they found another piece of evidence. Beneath an overhang near the base of a cliff, one of the local guides uncovered the remains of a small fabric pouch. Inside was a compass, rusted and broken, alongside a folded piece of map torn from a guidebook. Rachel had marked a rough path with a shaky line leading south toward what appeared to be a descent route. She had been trying to get down. The heartbreak of it was clear. She had a plan, however desperate, but the mountain had proven too merciless. The media coverage surrounding the expedition exploded once news of the note and pouch reached the public. Experts weighed in, speculating whether Rachel had simply lost her way or if something darker had occurred. Old rumors resurfaced about robberies and assaults in remote parts of Kilimanjaro, incidents rarely reported, but whispered among guides. Could Rachel have encountered someone with bad intentions? Or had the mysterious figure in her final photograph been more than coincidence? The Monroe family clung to one truth. Rachel had fought to come home. That knowledge fueled them even as the search dragged on with no sign of her remains. But here's where I need to stop you again, because if you think stories like Rachel's always end with closure, you're dangerously mistaken. Most don't. Most vanish into silence, leaving families with nothing but questions that torment them for decades. If you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself this. If you were Rachel's brother, her mother, her father, would you want the world to look away? Or would you want every possible ear to hear your story? Don't wait. Subscribe now, because forgetting is the final death, and silence is the cruelest grave. As the days wore on, tensions in the group rose. Supplies were dwindling, and exhaustion gnawed at their resolve. The Tanzanian authorities warned them they were pushing too far into dangerous terrain, that it was time to stop. But Henrik and the Monroe family insisted on one final sweep, convinced that the mountain still held Rachel's truth. On the 12th day, at the base of a steep gully not far from where the boot had been discovered, they found a final clue. Wedged beneath a slab of stone was the remnants of a torn scarf, bleached by sun and rain. DNA testing would later confirm it had belonged to Rachel. Near the scarf were faint impressions in the soil, as if someone had once collapsed there, unable to go further. The team searched desperately around the site, scouring every crack and shadow. But there were no bones, no full remains, only silence. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed her whole, keeping the last chapter of her story hidden forever. The Monroes finally conceded to end the physical search. They returned home with the locket, the boot, the note, and the pouch, each one a heartbreaking testament to their daughter's final days. The world had watched with them, and for the first time in 7 years, Rachel Monroe was more than just a name on a missing persons list. She was real, she was human, and her fight for survival had been seen. Yet the questions would never end. Had Rachel simply succumbed to exhaustion and exposure, her remains lost to the mountain's shifting terrain? Or had someone been with her? Someone who made sure her story ended there on that unforgiving slope? Henrik Bauer later admitted he often lay awake at night replaying every step of their search. He couldn't shake the image of those mysterious boot prints near the locket, or the faint shadow of a man in Rachel's last photograph. He believed they had found the truth, that she had died trying to descend. But deep down he feared a darker reality. And the cruelest truth of all? The mountain wasn't done keeping secrets. Months after the expedition returned, Rachel's story continued to grip the world. Newspapers ran features calling her the ghost of Kilimanjaro, while documentaries dissected every clue. The locket, the boot, the desperate note, they became haunting relics of a young woman's will to live in one of the harshest places on Earth. Yet one fact remained unshakable. Her body had never been recovered. And on Kilimanjaro, that meant her presence was still there, somewhere, hidden in the folds of rock and ice. The Tanzanian authorities eventually closed the case, labeling Rachel Monroe's disappearance an unresolved tragedy. For them, the evidence was enough. She had become lost, she had tried to descend, and she had perished in the wilderness. But for the Monroe family, that closure was hollow. They couldn't accept that her final resting place would remain unknown, that she would never be brought home. They continued to push for new searches, though the years wore on and interest faded. Only Henrik Bauer remained steadfast, returning to Kilimanjaro multiple times in the years that followed, retracing their steps and venturing deeper into uncharted gullies. He admitted he never stopped listening for her voice in the wind. But with each return, he uncovered more unsettling signs. In 2017, nearly 8 years after the initial rediscovery of Rachel's belongings, Henrik found a rusted metal flask wedged in a boulder field. Inside was water, long evaporated, and the initials RM scratched faintly into the side. Near it, a tattered scrap of notebook paper bore faint writing too faded to fully decipher, but one word was unmistakable: cold. It was yet another whisper from Rachel, as if she had been leaving a breadcrumb trail through time, desperately hoping that someone, anyone, would one day piece her story together. And still, her remains never surfaced. Experts say Kilimanjaro is full of places where the earth swallows evidence whole: deep crevices, hidden caves, shifting rocks. It's possible Rachel's body lies in one of these, preserved by the cold, waiting to be found. But others aren't so sure. Those mysterious boot prints near the locket, the faint shadow in the photograph, they linger like ghosts over every discussion of her case. Some believe she may not have died alone, that she may have crossed paths with someone who made sure her story ended in silence. The Monroe family, now older, rarely speaks to the media. When they do, they focus not on the theories but on Rachel herself, the girl who dreamed of standing on the roof of Africa, who loved photography and carried a silver locket from her grandmother, who believed in adventure even when the risks were high. Her mother once said in an interview, "Rachel left pieces of herself behind so we'd know she tried. That's all a parent can ask, for their child not to vanish completely." Henrik still climbs. He says he can't stop. Each ascent is a pilgrimage, a way of honoring the woman whose story became part of him. "She didn't give up," he once told a journalist, "and neither will I." But maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Because even after 7 years, after the locket, the boot, the note, and the scarf, Kilimanjaro refuses to give up its secret. The final resting place of Rachel Monroe. And I need to leave you with this. If Rachel's story chilled you, if it made you feel the weight of a life that could vanish so completely, don't let that feeling fade. Too many stories like hers disappear into silence, and silence is exactly what these mountains thrive on. Hit subscribe right now, not tomorrow, not later, right now, because forgetting is how stories like Rachel's truly die. And ask yourself this: if it were your sister, your daughter, your best friend, wouldn't you want the world to keep listening? Rachel Monroe's story is more than a tragedy. It's a warning, a reminder that even the strongest will and the fiercest love can be tested to the breaking point in the wilderness. And yet, in her final words, "Please don't forget me. She left behind a truth more enduring than stone. She was here. She fought. She mattered. And she will not be forgotten. The mountain still stands, silent and indifferent, its slopes holding on to secrets no map can reveal. But thanks to a silver locket, a desperate note, and a family who refused to stop searching, Rachel Monroe's voice echoes even now, carried on the winds of Kilimanjaro, reminding us all that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't death itself. It's the thought of being erased, and that's why her story must live on.